I'd like to talk to you this afternoon just a little bit about a topic I call spiritual heroism of the Holocaust. And certainly it's an emotional topic. However, I'd like to do a little bit of an analysis, and hopefully from that analysis we can draw out some deeper conclusions as to perhaps what the purpose of the Holocaust was, why Hashem brings suffering in general in Klal Yisrael. But I do ask everybody for such a discussion that we do put our emotion on the back burner and we make an effort to try to listen to what I will be saying, because obviously when we discuss something like this, it is a naturally, and it should be, it's a very emotional topic. First of all, I just have to say, when I was growing up as a kid, so I was always asking myself a question as to why we didn't find much resistance during the war. Maybe we would speak about the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and it was a glorious uprising. There's no question about it, and there were definitely groups that did fight back physically, but they were few and far between. And I guess the word that seemed to float around in the time period was like sheep to a slaughter. And it was a very upsetting term. And it wasn't until maybe, I guess, about 20 years ago or so, I think that I noticed it at least, maybe in the market, in literature and books, the realization that people were publishing their experience in the Holocaust and their heroism during the Holocaust, but it was heroism of a different nature. It wasn't the heroism of fighting back with a machine gun against tanks or with a pistol against an army. It was a heroism of fighting back with the spirit, and fighting back in a way that only a Jew can fight back, which is very unique. I saw a story, Mike Tress, a famous activist in America in the 1940s. He actually, a very, very well-known individual who did so much for Klal Yisrael. After the war, he went to the DP camps in Europe, and he did it to see what was happening and to find how funds can be used properly. And of course, many Jews we know were in these camps after the war, no place to go. And he gave a lot of chizuk, strength to many people. He writes, or it's written in his biography, that in this camp he met a man, and it was very unusual because it was actually a Rabbi, a Hasidic Rabbi. He was a youngish man, but he was the Rabbi to a certain dynasty, and he had a long beard. And it was very surprising because to meet a Jew in the DP camp, the deportation camp, a Jew who went through the war did not have beards. Because, either you were in a place, either you were hiding, in which case you had to look like the non-Jew, so you had to cut it off, or you were in a place where the Nazis forced you to cut it off. But to have a beard meant, and a long beard, meant you had to have given it time to have grown. So Rabbi Mike Tress came up to him and he said to him, I see you have such a beard like that. Can you explain, how did you survive the war with such a beard? So he said to him, in Yiddish, he said, Ich bin ein Partisan. I'm a partisan. He said, really, you're a partisan? Partisans, you fought with the Russian partisans, you fought with the Polish partisans, you fought in the forests? He said, no. He said, there's many ways to be a partisan. He said, I was in hiding. But I was a partisan because I said no matter where I'm going to be, I'm not going to cut my beard. I'm going to look like a Jew even in hiding. That was my way of resisting. That was resistance. He said, Ich bin ein partisan. I'm a partisan. I saw that story and I realized there are many ways to be a partisan. There are many ways to fight. You can fight physically or you could fight spiritually. And I'd like to show right now what the spiritual resistance was about. In order to get there, however, let's take just a quick look at the model for a Holocaust and understand why Hashem might bring such an event. Of course, when I say such a thing, I'm not claiming to know the answer. All I'm doing is I'm investigating Jewish sources, and by investigating it, let's draw conclusions from what we see. Our sages always point to Mitzrayim, to Egypt, as a model for all anti-Semitism. So if we look at Egypt at just a cursory 2-minute analysis, what do we see? First of all, we see that the first thing that Joseph says to his brothers when they come down to Egypt, after the years of separation, finally the brothers are coming down to Mitzrayim, to Egypt, and Yosef meets them, and it's a very, very warm reunion. And one would expect in such a reunion that Yosef would tell them, listen, I have a place for you to stay now, you're going to be living here, I want you to take a shower, and it's a long journey from Eretz Yisrael to Mitzrayim, not like today, relax, get set, and tomorrow morning we'll decide what our future is going to be in Egypt. Joseph doesn't do that. First thing Yosef says to them, first thing he arrives, he says to them, listen, I want to send you all to Goshen. Goshen was a place where apparently very good for pasturing sheep, and the Egyptians worshipped the sheep god, so this was not a place which they normally would be at. So I want to send you to a place where you won't have the problem of interacting too much with the Egyptians. That's the first thing he tells them, which is interesting. Then Joseph brings the brothers before Paro, and he wants his illustrious brothers now to meet the king. And he says to Paro, these are my brothers. They're all shepherds. Now in Egypt, by the way, to be a shepherd was a very, very terrible profession. Because the sheep is a god. And you're the guy who takes a stick and has to hit their god. It's a terrible thing. Shepherds were anathema to Egyptian thought. He said, these are my brothers. They're all shepherds. You can imagine such a scenario. It's like if a plane of Russian Jews arrived, I don't have anything, no, just happened to be, let's say, a plane of Russian Jews arrive in Israel, and a family gets off, and this person comes to the minister of absorption and said, listen, I'm from Russia. In Russia we had $1 billion industry, and we want to apply our $1 billion industry now to the Israeli economy. So the ministry of absorption says, wonderful, that's fantastic. What do you do? He said, we were in racketeering and profiteering. He said, gambling, alcohol, cocaine trafficking, and we as $1 billion industry. We want to apply that now to your country. So the ministry of absorption would send them back. Here they come down to Egypt. They say, guess what? These are our brothers. They're shepherds. Oh, what's Yosef trying to say? He's telling Paro, send them away. Don't keep them hanging around here. Get them far away from the Egyptians. Now what happens? Life goes on in Egypt, and a few words hint us off as to what the Jewish experience was like. It says, "V'yeshiv Yisrael b'Eretz Mitzrayim, b'Eretz Goshen." It says that the Jewish people dwelled in Mitzrayim, in the land of Goshen. V'ya'achasu ba v'yifu v'yirbu b'yod, and they acquired possessions, and they increased and they multiplied. Interesting. Ya'achazu, the word to acquire actually doesn't mean possessions. Ya'achazu is a word that you use when you acquire land. Achuz. Apparently they began to buy land in Egypt. And the wording, if we know a little bit of Hebrew, it says v'yachazuba, which could be read, the land acquired them. Which is kind of interesting. Because if you're in exile, and you feel that you have to pick up from your exile at any moment, do you invest your money in precious gems, yes, gold, or in condominiums in Florida? I dare say in precious gems and gold. Why? Because you feel you have to be on the move. You have to be ready to go. But it says, v'ya'achazuba. They started possessing, or the land possessed them. They started very, very comfortable in their natural setting. And then the pasuk says, v'yirbu ba'od b'miyod. And they started increasing very much in something called mi'od. You know what does mi'od mean in Hebrew? Mi'od means very much. But if you say ma'od b'mi'od, what does b'mi'od mean? You can't increase in very much. Sometimes mi'od is a noun. V'yahavta es Hashem Elokecha, you love the Lord your God, b'chol levavecha, with all your heart, b'chol nafshecha, u'b'chol ma'odecha, which means your wealth. That which is used to get more is your money. Money has no value except to get more. That's why it's called mi'od. It says v'yirbu mi'od b'mi'od. They started getting very rich and started acquiring real estate. Now, the Jewish nations get very comfortable in the land. Now, it's very interesting. towards the end of the